The wind came low and cold across the prairie that morning, like it remembered things it couldn't forgive. Sagebrush stirred in the silence, bowing in brittle waves as the sun rose behind a veil of gray sky. A lone figure moved through that silence, small, wrapped in layers of frayed fabric, steps uneven from fatigue and frost. Strapped to her chest, tight as breath, was a bundle wrapped in a shawl the color of dusk. The baby did not cry. She had learned not to. Behind them, the wagon sat broken on its one good wheel, half tilted in the frozen earth, like it had given up on ever rolling forward. The mule, stiff and gone, lay crumpled beside it, eyes clouded over with that empty sort of stillness. A grave had been dug shallow, earth too hard for anything deeper. The woman hadn't marked it. There were no stones to spare. Her boots were near worn through. Each step forward sent needles through her arches, but still she moved, guided not by a trail but by the faintest curl of smoke in the sky. Chimney smoke. Hearth fire. Somewhere someone had warmth. Food. Perhaps even mercy. She didn't expect kindness. She never had. Not from men who looked down when they spoke to her, not from women who whispered when they passed. But she had heard once, through a trader in Wabash, or maybe a telegraph clerk in Casper, of a place far west that took in workers with no questions, so long as their hands knew what to do. So when she saw the torn posting nailed to a rail outside a snowed-over depot, *** cook wanted. Long term. Must be capable, ***. She walked toward it. Didn't know who had written it. Didn't care. By the time she reached the wide cattle lands of Montana Territory, her name felt like it belonged to someone else. Maybe it did. Maybe she had left that person behind when the train doors closed back in Illinois, or maybe when she held her dead husband's ring over a riverbank and let it fall without sound into the current. That man had given her nothing but bruises and silence. This baby, this breath of life pressed against her chest, had given her something back. A reason not to collapse. The ranch appeared sudden through the trees, vast and worn, with a wraparound porch like a curled hand, and fences that stretched too far to see where they ended. Dozens of cattle dotted the hills, moving in slow patterns beneath the sky. A barn roof glinted with frost. A man stepped out from the porch, tall and solitary, the kind of man who had grown into the shape of grief and made it a second skin. His coat was long, boots dusted with ash from the hearth behind him. He didn't flinch at the sight of her. Just watched. She didn't speak. Her lips were cracked and dry. She simply stopped, close enough to hear the creak of the wooden step beneath his heel. He stepped forward once, glanced down at the child, and then back at her. She was pale but not fragile, cold but not broken. Her eyes stayed on his. "I posted for a cook," he said flatly. His voice was like earth turned under a shovel. She nodded, shifted the child on her chest. "That all?" he asked. "No trouble. No history," she said softly. "Just hands that work." He watched her a moment longer, eyes narrowing like he was weighing stone. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. "You get one night." She nodded again, walked past him, boots dragging slightly on the boards. The child shifted beneath the shawl, but made no sound. Inside, the house was colder than expected, bigger than it needed to be. It was clean but unlived in. Dust along the top of the stair rail. A music box on the mantel, wound down and silent. A photo in a metal frame, face of a woman, soft smile faded from sun exposure. An older woman stood near the hearth, arms folded, apron neat and stiff. She looked the new arrival up and down. Said nothing. "You'll take the bunk off the kitchen," the man said. "Don't touch the east room." That was hers. Again she nodded. She didn't ask. By morning, she had made coffee before the rooster crowed. Baked biscuits that cracked apart in steam. The older housekeeper watched her knead with quiet judgment, but by the end of the meal, she had eaten 3. The baby slept through the day, cheeks flushed from fever. The woman boiled cloths and fed her water through a drop of sugar. She didn't ask for medicine. She didn't ask for rest. She cleaned the hearth, chopped wood, hauled pails. The ranch hands noticed. One whistled low under his breath when he saw her lift a feed sack near half her weight. "She ain't here to sit," the older woman muttered, though no one had asked. The man, ***, the cattle baron, ***, they called him, watched from a distance. Always just watching. He'd walk through the hall in silence, pause at the door, then keep going. At dinner, he'd eat without speaking. But each night, a second bowl was left on the table. Each morning, the coffee pot was hot before she rose. Once, she found him standing in the barn before dawn, staring at a saddle that hadn't been used in years. He didn't look up when she passed, didn't speak when a baby gave a small cry. But he didn't leave either. He stayed until the sun cracked over the hills. On the 7th day, the older housekeeper dropped her spoon at dinner, clutched her chest. The woman was across the table in a heartbeat, laid her down, loosened the apron, placed a cool cloth on her brow. Knew what herbs to boil. The cattle baron watched all of it, silent, leaning against the doorframe. When it was over and the housekeeper slept, he said nothing to the woman. Just walked out into the cold and split firewood until midnight. In the dark, by lantern glow, she rocked the child with one hand and mended a torn curtain with the other. Her needle worked through cloth like it was stitching a life back together. The next day, the man added a second blanket to her bed. Said nothing about it. A week passed. Then 2. The snow softened. Grass began to show again in spots where the sun lingered long. She never asked to stay longer. But she did. One afternoon, after scrubbing the porch, she stood looking out toward the fence line, wind teasing strands of her hair loose from the tie. Behind her, the screen door creaked. The baron stepped out. He said, "You got a name?" She turned her head slightly, eyes tracing the hills. "I did," she answered. "Not sure I kept it." A long silence followed. He didn't press. "I buried a wife 2 years back," he said finally. "Cancer took her slow." She nodded, said nothing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver pin. Just a plain thing, a crescent moon etched faintly into it. She liked this, he said. Said it made her feel seen. He handed it to her without ceremony. Not a gift, not a gesture. Just a moment shared between 2 people who understood the ache of carrying too much alone. She held the pin in her palm, ran her thumb across its face. "Thank you," she whispered. He turned and stepped back inside. The door creaked closed behind him. She stood there a moment longer, wind catching her hair, eyes distant. Then she pinned the moon to her collar, close to her heart. From a barn, the baby gave a soft sound, not a cry, just a stirring. A small reminder of life that refused to be quieted. The woman turned toward it, walked back into the house as the first stars rose over the prairie. And though neither of them knew it just yet, something had changed in that silence, something gentle, small, and growing. Like spring beneath the snow. The wind shifted in late February. No longer cruel, but cautious, like it too was watching something unfold in the hush between storms. Days stretched longer, shadows softened, and the ranch began to breathe again. Calves were born slick and wide-eyed in the straw. Trees near the creek held the smallest buds of green, shy as children at church. Inside the house, life unfolded in quiet, practical rhythms. The woman had found her place, not by asking for it, but by becoming indispensable to it. The baby, wrapped often in blankets and laughter, grew stronger by the week. Her eyes, once dulled by hunger, sparkled now in the amber light of early morning, and her cries grew bolder, filled with the certainty that someone would answer. The ranch hands no longer gave sideways glances. They tipped their hats when she passed, even stopped their work to help her with buckets and fencing. Not out of pity, but out of something closer to respect. She carried herself like someone who'd walked through fire barefoot and learned not to flinch. It wasn't strength that drew people, it was survival, bone deep and quiet. The kind of thing that humbled a man. She cooked without fuss. Her cornbread didn't rise high, but filled the belly. Her stews were thick, heavy with meat and mercy. Each night, the cattle baron sat at the head of the table and ate in silence, and each night she refilled his plate before he asked. They said little to one another, but something settled in the air between them, a softness, a stillness that wasn't there before. Not affection, not yet, but recognition. On a Tuesday morning, she found him in the barn, sleeves rolled to the elbow, repairing a broken stall door. He looked up, sweat on his brow, and nodded once. "You can sew anything?" he asked, straightening. She shrugged. "Most things. Saddles, shirts, skin when I have to." He grunted. Not disapproval. Just acknowledgement. He handed her a cracked leather cinch. "She was good with her hands, too," he said, eyes fixed on a beam above them. "She was your wife," she said, not as a question. He nodded once. Name still on the bedroom door. "Can't take it off." She didn't answer. Just ran her fingers along the tear, feeling where the leather had begun to rot from inside. "She die here?" she asked softly. "No," he said. "Back east. I brought her home in a pine box." She nodded, took the strap, and sat cross-legged on a hay bale with needle and thread. He didn't speak again, just watched her hands work in the pale light. By nightfall, the cinch was repaired, and the barn smelled of cedar and sweat. As she stood to go, the baby stirred on her shoulder. He reached out, almost instinctively, and steadied the child's head as she adjusted the sling. For a moment, his hand stayed there, broad and warm against the curve of the baby's crown. When he realized, he drew it back, muttering something about the chill. But she had seen the way his fingers curled, reluctant to let go. There was no storm that week, but something came anyway. A man on horseback, fine coat, trimmed beard, voice slick with familiarity. He rode up without introduction and asked to speak with the Baron. When she stepped outside, he gave her a smirk that lingered too long. "You're the one living here, I take it," he said. She looked him over. "I work here." He snorted. "Is that what they're calling it now?" She said nothing, just stepped aside as the Baron came out onto the porch, hands tucked into his belt. "What's your business?" he asked, voice like dry timber. The man doffed his hat. "Just came to see what kind of operation you're running these days. Lot of talk in town. About new arrangements." "There ain't no arrangement," the Baron said. "She cooks. Works. Nothing more." The man glanced back at her. "Folks say she brought more than biscuits." The Baron's jaw shifted. A long silence passed. "You done here?" he asked. The visitor smirked, adjusted his reins. "Just passing the message along. Town don't take kindly to strays being brought in. She's not one of us." "She's one of mine," the Baron said, then turned his back and walked inside. The man lingered a few seconds longer, spat in the dirt, then rode off with the sound of hooves slicing the quiet. She stood by the door a moment longer. Didn't ask questions. Didn't thank him either. Just watched the dust trail until it disappeared behind the ridgeline. That night, the baby cried for hours. Teething. Fever, maybe. The woman walked the floor barefoot, humming songs half-remembered from childhood. The Baron passed her room once, paused by the door. She heard his boots stop, then step back. A moment later, there was a knock. "Need anything?" he asked. She opened the door partway, child flushed and fitful against her chest. He looked at the baby, not her. "I got some willow bark in the cellar. Used it for colic once." She nodded. "Please." He returned with a small glass vial and a cup of water. Handed it over. Their fingers touched. Neither flinched. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and now blinked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "She got your strength," he said. "She's all I've got." He nodded. "That's plenty." He turned and walked away, footsteps heavy on the wood. The next morning, he was already out in the pasture when she brought him coffee. She didn't say anything, just handed him the tin mug, and stood beside him. The grass was gold in the morning light, and cattle moved like slow shadows across the hills. He said, "You ever think about leaving?" She shook her head. "I've had enough of going. I just want a place to be." He didn't answer, but something shifted in his stance. Like he'd been holding his breath for years, and just now remembered how to let it out. Later that week, she found herself humming while cleaning the parlor. The music box on the mantel caught her eye. Dust-covered. Unwound. She wiped it gently, then turned the key. The melody came out broken, notes missing like teeth, but it played. She didn't hear him enter behind her. "She used to play that every night," he said quietly. She turned, startled, but didn't move away. "I didn't mean to." He raised a hand. "It's all right. I forget how long it's been since I heard it." She nodded. "It's beautiful, even cracked." "So was she," he said. And then, after a pause, "So are you." The words hung in the air between them, delicate and dangerous. She turned away. "I should get back to supper." He didn't stop her. Just stood by the doorway, looking at the music box like it might start playing whole again if he stared long enough. A few days later, a letter came from town. A neighbor had taken ill. The housekeeper, who had begun to recover from her own spell, said she'd ride out and care for her sister. The house, now quieter, echoed with footsteps and the creak of beams settling at night. In that silence, the woman and the Baron found themselves sharing more space. She poured his coffee before he asked. He fixed the latch on her window without saying a word. One night, a lantern blew out mid-supper, and they both reached to relight it, hands brushing in the dark. She pulled back quickly. He didn't. "Do you miss her?" she asked quietly. He looked at the flame, then at her. "I miss what we had," he said, "but not what I've lost." She didn't understand until days later, when she caught him smiling at the baby as she toddled barefoot across the porch. Just a flicker there and gone, but real. Spring crept closer with the sound of frogs at the creek and the smell of wet earth after thaw. She planted herbs in the small patch behind the kitchen, humming softly with dirt on her hands. He built a new shelf for jars in the pantry. Didn't say it was for her, but she filled it anyway. One evening, as dusk folded itself into the corners of the sky, she stood watching the horizon from the porch. The baby slept soundly against her shoulder. The Baron stepped out beside her, offered her a blanket. "You've earned more than one night," he said. She turned to him, the light catching in her eyes. "I never expected more than that," she said. He looked at the child, then back at her. "Sometimes things grow where we don't plant them," he murmured. She nodded. "And sometimes they bloom anyway." They stood there, side by side, not touching but not apart. And behind them, the door to the east room, still bearing another woman's name, remained closed. But for the first time, it did not feel like a barrier. Just a chapter turned. The wind picked up, soft and stirring, like breath drawn deep before a word is spoken. And inside that breath, something waited. Quiet, patient, becoming. The first sign of spring came not in color, but in sound. A lone creek that had been buried under frost began to whisper again beneath the thaw. The trees remained bare, but the soil softened underfoot. In the mornings, mist clung to the grass like breath, and the wind brought with it the scent of rain and old things awakening. Inside the ranch house, change came just as quietly. She had lived there through the coldest months, yet the walls had not begun to feel like hers until recently. Her boots no longer creaked on the floorboards the same way. The baby no longer whimpered when the Baron came near. She had memorized the pattern of shadows that crawled across the parlor walls at dusk and the way the floor warmed where sunlight fell through the lace curtains. She began to hum again, not the half-silent murmurs of duty, but soft melodies from somewhere deep, older than memory. The baby swayed to the tune, sometimes mimicking her with small warbles of joy that filled the house like birdsong. The cattle Baron listened. From the porch, from the barn, sometimes from a hallway, pausing with his hand on the doorframe. He never interrupted. He just stood still, letting the sound carry through him like something sacred. And maybe in a way it was. They had fallen into rhythm, not as lovers, not as kin, but as something quieter, something earned. Still, there were things unsaid, long silences that lived between them like rivers yet unbridged. She did not ask about the late wife's letters, folded neatly in a drawer behind his desk. He did not ask about the child's father, or the bruises that never fully faded from her memory. They existed together not because they sought answers, but because they offered each other rest. But rest in the West was rarely left untouched. It came on a day of wind and dust, a day when the baby took her first real steps on the wooden floor of the kitchen, one hand outstretched and wobbling like a sapling in a storm. The woman laughed, full and from the chest, and scooped the child into her arms. The Baron had been walking past and stopped at the sound. He leaned there a moment, watching, the corners of his mouth lifting with a kind of wonder. Then came the pounding of hooves outside. Not one horse, but several. Urgent. Dust kicked up in a furious cloud as 4 riders approached the front gate, wearing coats too fine for ranch work and expressions too sour for courtesy. She stepped outside first, shielding her daughter with her shawl. The Baron followed close behind, his rifle slung loose at his side, not raised, but not forgotten. The man in front was familiar, the one from town, the one who had called her astray. "You didn't get the message the first time?" the Baron asked, voice low. "I came to deliver a different one," the man said, dismounting. "You're housing a squatter, one who's left trouble behind her in 3 counties. You think we don't hear things?" The woman's spine straightened. She said nothing. The man's voice sharpened. "She's a widow by convenience, if you catch my drift. And her child? Could be anyone's." The Baron took one slow step forward. His boots crunched on gravel. "You done?" he asked. "Not yet," the man sneered. "You're a respected landowner. People listen to you. You shelter a woman like her, you lose that. Your contracts, your cattle buyers, your seat on the council." The Baron glanced at her. Not her face, but the way she gripped her child, knuckles white. "Respect," he said softly, "ain't worth much if it's earned by cruelty." One of the other men shifted in his saddle. "She's not even from here. She has no land, no claim. She's hiding behind your walls." "No," the Baron said, stepping between them. "She's building something under them." The man spat in the dirt. "Then let her stand on her own and see what the town thinks." He turned, mounted again, and rode off without waiting for an answer. The others followed. The dust hadn't even settled before she turned to go inside. The Baron reached for her arm, not hard, just enough to stop her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, eyes shining with something sharp. "They only come for women like me when we stop being invisible." He wanted to speak, but no words came. So he just let go. That night, the baby cried again. Not from fever this time, but from growing pains, small bones stretching in the quiet dark. The woman rocked her gently, whispering songs that had no words. The Baron stood at the threshold, holding a bowl of warm milk with honey. "She still won't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head, taking the bowl. "She dreams of things she's too young to understand." He watched her for a long while. "You ever want to leave?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, sometimes, but only out of habit. "Running's what I knew." He nodded, as if he understood more than he could say. "Then maybe it's time you unlearned it," he said. The next morning, he showed her something he hadn't shown anyone since the funeral. A piece of land not far from the creek. A narrow grove of cottonwoods wrapped around a clearing where wildflowers already poked through the earth. "She always wanted a garden here," he said, hands in his pockets. "Never got around to planting it." She stood silently beside him, the child in her arms, watching the grass ripple. "I thought maybe," he continued, voice low, "you might like to grow something." She didn't answer, just knelt down in the dirt and ran her fingers through the soil. It was warm. Ready. The following weeks passed with purpose. She dug rows and laid seed. He built a small fence around it, just high enough to keep the deer out. The baby toddled between them, hands perpetually covered in dirt, joy humming in her throat. But word from town grew louder. Women whispered in shops. Men avoided the Baron's handshake. Business slowed. A shipment of feed was delayed without reason. She noticed. So did he. But neither spoke of it. Instead, he began to spend more time at home, as if making himself available might be enough. She started writing lists, planning the pantry for winter. The house, once silent, now held echoes of things yet to come. One evening, while repairing a window shutter together, their hands brushed. She paused, then left hers there. He didn't move. They looked at one another, and in that glance lived 1,000 unspoken fears and one unshakable truth. They were no longer strangers passing through each other's lives. Later, as they sat by the fire, the baby asleep on a quilt nearby, she asked softly, "What do you see when you look at me?" He stared into the flames. "A woman who doesn't flinch." She turned to him. "Is that all?" He looked at her then, truly looked. A woman who made room in a broken house, who planted a garden where someone else left grief. She blinked slowly. "You didn't answer what you see. You answered what I am." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I see the rest of my life," he said. Then, after a pause, "if you'll have me in it." Her hand moved toward the firelight, trembling slightly. Not from fear, from the weight of being seen. She said nothing, but she didn't look away. The baby stirred then, rolling over with a sigh that broke the silence. And in that fragile, flickering moment, something final bloomed. Not romance, not possession, but arrival. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted again. This time it was warm. The nights turned gentler, though spring was still a reluctant thing in those parts, more suggestion than season. Grass grew taller near the creek, and birds nested in the rafters of the barn again. In the kitchen, she strung herbs to dry from the beam above the stove. Lavender, sage, a few handfuls of wild chamomile. The scent lingered long after the fire had gone out. The baby had begun to speak in that sweet, indecipherable language only mothers seem to understand. Small syllables shaped by need and delight, like music with no beginning or end. She called the cattle baron does sometimes, though not because anyone had taught her to. The woman had never said the word aloud in front of her child, but the baby said it anyway, as if she knew deep in the marrow what safety looked like. He heard it first while mending a wagon wheel on the porch. The baby toddled up, her little hands sticky with berry jam, and reached for him, saying it clear as sun through a window pane. "Duh." He froze. The wrench slipped from his fingers. Then, without thinking, he gathered her into his arms, held her as if the name had been carved into him by the touch of her voice. The woman stood in the doorway, silent, one hand braced against the frame. She didn't stop her, didn't correct her. Her eyes filled slowly with something too old to name. That evening, the cattle baron didn't sit in his usual chair. He stayed on the floor beside the child until she fell asleep on his chest, tiny hand resting over his heart like a benediction. And yet, peace never settles for long in places built by struggle. It happened after sundown, when the sky was smeared in violet and smoke. A faint scent hit the wind first, bitter, wrong, like hair singed or oil boiled too long. She smelled it before she saw the flames. The barn was burning. The fire started from the far end, where dry hay had been piled against the back wall. Flames snapped upward, licking at the roof beams, casting long shadows across the pasture, like claws reaching for the sky. The horses screamed. One of the oxen rammed the gate in blind panic. She shouted for him, ran barefoot through the cold grass, baby clutched to her chest, smoke already stinging her eyes. He was at the far stall, unhooking the last halter with hands blistered from heat, hair singed at the ends. The ranch hand, old and nearly half-lame, was dragging a calf out by the rope tied to its neck, coughing through a bandana. "Where's the child?" he shouted. "She's with me," she cried back. "Get her in the root cellar," the baron ordered hoarse. But she didn't run. Not yet. Not until she saw the side wall give, one great groan, like a tree splitting under thunder, and the roof begin to collapse. He had one foot in the smoke, pulling a panicked colt by the reins. She screamed, but he didn't look back. Then through the blaze, he stumbled out, coughing, leading the colt like a ghost dragging a miracle. She met him halfway and pulled his coat over his shoulders, her free hand pressing his burned wrist. They didn't sleep that night. The fire ate the barn hole. The next morning, all that remained were embers and questions. No lightning had come. No oil lamps had fallen. But footprints, too many, too sharp, circled the back of the property like a warning. They both knew who'd sent them. At first, he wanted to ride into town, set things straight with fists and fury. But she stopped him. Her hand gripped his arm the way only someone who had learned the language of ruin could. Firm, measured, grieving. "You'll make it worse," she said. "And they want you too." He stood in silence a long time, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. Then he nodded once. Only once. Instead, they rebuilt. Slowly. Together. He ordered fresh lumber from the next county, bypassing the men in town who had begun charging double just to spite him. She stitched new harnesses from the salvaged leather, her fingers calloused and quick. They worked side by side with no talk of what had been lost, only what could be saved. She taught the baby to press seeds into the garden with her thumb. He taught her how to tie a proper knot, and how to listen for when a horse's breath went wrong in the night. The house filled again, not just with motion, but with intention. The rebuilding gave the rooms new shape. One evening, the baron handed her a bundle of parchment wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" she asked, brow furrowing. "Deed papers," he said. "Half the land. For you. And her." Her fingers trembled. "I don't need." "You don't," he said. "But she does. And I want her to have it." She looked at him then, eyes full of the kind of pain that only comes when something long hoped for arrives too quietly to celebrate. "I thought I'd never belong anywhere," she whispered. "I've been someone's shame for so long, I forgot what a welcome felt like." He reached out, calloused thumb brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You don't belong here," he said softly. She froze. "You are here. That's the difference." And something in her broke then, not in pain but in relief. In the slow undoing of a life spent holding herself too tightly. That night, for the first time, she asked to stay in his room. She didn't ask for promises, just for space beside him. And when the baby cried, both of them rose, his hands cradling her head, hers settling the child back to sleep. Outside, the wind passed through the trees in soft confession. A barn was gone, but a family had been built. Months passed. The townsfolk noticed the changes. Some turned colder. Others turned quiet. One day, the man who'd spat at her name came to the property line, hat in hand, eyes heavy. "I was wrong," he said. "About her. About what makes a man respectable." The baron said nothing, just turned and walked back to the house. The woman, watching from the window, said only, "Let them come in their own time." And they did. A fence post was repaired by a neighbor. A pie left on the porch with no note. The shopkeeper offered flour, at half price the next trip in. Nothing loud. But sometimes the strongest apologies are the ones unspoken. One final afternoon, just before the first signs of summer, the woman stood in the garden, dirt under her nails, the baby toddling beside her. She looked up to find the Baron watching from the porch, his hand resting on the doorframe, as if steadying himself in the face of too much beauty. She walked to him slowly, not with hesitation, but with certainty. "I've been thinking," she said. "There's still one thing missing." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She reached into her apron, pulled out the small silver moon pin he'd given her long ago. "I want her to know her name," she said. "Not just yours, not just mine, but ours. Together." He looked at the pin, then at her. "Then let's give her a name the land will remember," he said. She nodded. And there on the porch, as the sun slipped below the ridge and the wind curled soft through the grass, they began the next chapter, not as a woman who wandered or a man who grieved, but as a family built not on blood but on choice. And though no one saw it from the valley below, high on that ranch hill, two figures stood side by side as equals, as partners, roots deep in soil scorched but not barren. Because sometimes the fire comes not to destroy, but to clear the ground for something stronger to grow.